Perdóname, madre.
¿Eres tú, Aurelio?
No debí dejarte. No es lo que crees. Voy a arreglarlo todo.
Before we begin, I'd like to ask you for a small favor. I'm really hoping to break through the magical barrier of 1,000 subscribers. That number holds a special significance for me. Hit that subscribe button. It's just one click, but for me, it's a huge boost of motivation to create my next video. Thank you in advance. He became a millionaire and returned for his elderly mother, who wept upon finding him abandoned. The man driving the black Suburban had crossed half the country to reach this dirt road. Yet when he finally rounded the last bend and saw that stooped figure outside the adobe house, his legs felt as if they were emptying from the inside, as if he were 18 again and knew nothing of the world. Aurelio Montoya Garza, 42 years old, owner of 3 construction companies, 2 buildings in Guadalajara, and a penthouse in the Providencia neighborhood overlooking the Los Colomos forest. The man his partners called the Bull of Jalisco because he knew no defeat in business. The same man who now quietly ordered his chauffeur to stop the vehicle 50 meters from that dilapidated house because suddenly he was incapable of moving even 1 more meter. "Mr. Montoya," said Gerardo, the chauffeur, without turning around. Stop here." The Suburban halted. Behind it, another identical vehicle braked, as did the 2 bodyguards who accompanied him everywhere. Serious, trained men who had seen their boss negotiate millions without his voice faltering, but who had never seen him like this. With white knuckles gripping the leather armrest and his eyes fixed on something on the other side of the windshield, Aurelio didn't hear them. He didn't even notice the engine was still running. He only saw his mother. Consuelo Garza de Montoya was 75 years old, though that day she seemed to carry many more. She was sitting on a wooden chair Aurelio didn't recognize. The old chair in the hallway had broken when he was 10. He himself had broken it playing, and his father had given him a memorable whipping for it. So this was another chair, equally aged, equally tired. On her lap rested a dark cloth, and her hands, those hands he remembered as soft and smelling of corn dough, moved slowly, sewing something, mending something, as she always had too. She wore a faded beige rebozo over her shoulders, a gray blouse of the kind that no longer has a defined color because it has been washed too many times. Her feet, in old huaraches, rested on the packed earth of the patio, and her face looked into the void with an expression that Aurelio took a few seconds to identify, and which then fell upon him like a concrete slab. It was the face of someone who no longer expects anything. There was no active sadness on that face, no tears, no complaint. It was something worse. It was absolute resignation. The face of a person who had decided at some point that no one saw that the world had finished having anything pending for her, and that now all that remained was to wait, to mend torn fabrics, and to let the days pass without making noise. Aurelio opened the Suburban's door before Gerardo could get out to open it for him. His shoes, Italian loafers of genuine leather, $300 a pair, touched the earth of that rural road for the first time in 22 years. The dry earth of San Isidro Polvoriento, municipality of Sayula, Jalisco. The same earth he had sworn never to set foot on again, poor. And he wasn't stepping on it poor, that was true, but he wasn't sure how he was stepping on it either. The air smelled the same. That was the first thing that hit him. The smell of dry earth, wood smoke, a hint of donkey dung in the distance, and that indefinable smell that small towns have at dusk, as if the afternoon itself were slowly turning golden. He had forgotten that smell, or perhaps he had worked very hard to forget it. It made no difference. He took a step, then another. His mother didn't see him. She continued sewing with the slowness of someone who has no hurry because time no longer belongs to her. Her hands moved, the needle entered and exited the dark cloth, and Consuelo Garza continued looking at nothing with that terrible peace that churned Aurelio's stomach. He stopped about 8 meters away. He couldn't move any further. Not yet. He observed the house. His grandfather, Don Refugio, had built it with his hands in adobe mixed with straw, and in its time it had been a decent house for a working family in San Isidro. 4 rooms, a covered hallway in front, a backyard with a mesquite tree that gave good shade in summer. Aurelio had grown up there. He had learned to walk in that patio. He had dreamed in that hallway of going far, of being someone, of not having to count cents for groceries. What he saw now left him speechless. The roof of the hallway was sunken on the right side. 3 rotten beams that no one had replaced. The clay tiles were broken, some were missing entirely, and in their place, someone had put cardboard sheets held down with stones. The provisional fix that in Mexico lasts for decades. The adobe walls showed wide cracks like scars, and the pale yellow paint his mother applied every year to make the house look pretty had completely disappeared, replaced by the dirty gray of exposed mortar. The main door, which used to have a wrought iron knocker his father had brought from Guadalajara with great pride, was secured with a wire bent into a hook. The patio gate, which used to be painted green, and which his father checked every Sunday to see if it needed welding, was now just a rusty skeleton of tubes held together more by habit than by structure. The bougainvillea his mother planted the year Aurelio was born, "So you'll have flowers for your birthday," she used to tell him. It was still alive, stubborn as ever, its purple branches hanging over the gate, as if refusing to surrender along with everything else. Aurelio felt something break in his chest. It wasn't a metaphor, it was a physical, concrete sensation, like when you squeeze a glass too hard and suddenly hear it crack. He had been sending money for 4 years. 4 years since his company truly took off and he could start sending significant amounts. Before, he sent what he could. 500 pesos, 1,000, 3,000 when a project went well. But for the last 4 years, he had wired punctually like clockwork, 15,000 pesos monthly to his brother Rodrigo's account. 15,000 pesos monthly so his mother could live with dignity, so the house would be in order. So Consuelo Garza de Montoya wouldn't have to mend old rags on a broken chair in front of a crumbling house. 15,000 pesos monthly for 4 years. 720,000 pesos in total. Aurelio did the calculation unintentionally, as he always did. Numbers were his native language, more than Spanish, more than anything else. 720,000 pesos. And his mother was sitting there, patching old clothes, with a sagging house, with a cardboard roof, with a wire instead of a knocker, with that empty gaze of someone who expects absolutely nothing. "Sir," said one of the bodyguards, very softly behind him. "Stay there," Aurelio said without turning. He took 3 more steps. Now he was 5 meters from the rusty gate, close enough to see the details that weren't apparent from afar. His mother's hands had dark spots on her knuckles, the kind that come from hard work and constant sun. Her shoulders were more stooped than he remembered. The beige rebozo had a hole in the right corner mended with thread of a different color. She still didn't see him. She kept sewing. And then Aurelio Montoya Garza, the bull of Jalisco, the man who had built an empire from scratch, the man who didn't cry in business meetings, nor when credit was denied, nor when a partner betrayed him, that man brought both hands to his face and covered them tightly, pressing his fingers against his eyes. Because if he didn't, he was going to do something he didn't know how to stop. How many years had he told himself that his mother was fine, that the money was arriving, that Rodrigo was taking care of everything, that he could continue building his world there in Guadalajara, because here in San Isidro, everything was under control. How many times had he silenced that background call that whispered to him that he should go see with his own eyes? Now he saw with his own eyes, and what he saw had no name. "Aurelio!" The voice came from the old hallway, a little hoarse with that accent from southern Jalisco that Aurelio had spent years polishing so it wouldn't be noticeable in the city, but instantly recognizable. Like a language one thinks they've forgotten, and that returns complete at the first sound. His mother had seen him. Consuelo had let the cloth fall onto her lap and was looking at him with narrowed eyes, as if unsure of what she was seeing, as if the sun were playing a trick on her, as if she had learned over all these years not to trust what her eyes saw when they thought they saw good things. Aurelio repeated, his voice now with something different, something that trembled at the edges very softly, like a candle flame when a draft passes. He lowered his hands from his face. He couldn't say anything. He was 42 years old, 3 companies, a penthouse, 140 direct employees, and at that moment, he was incapable of uttering a single syllable. His mother stood up slowly, with that careful movement of someone whose bones are tired and knows they must treat their own body with gentleness. The cloth fell to the hallway floor. She didn't pick it up. She took 2 steps toward the rusty gate, one hand extended as if to lean on something that wasn't there. "Son," she said. Nothing more, just that word. And Aurelio crossed those 5 meters that separated him from the gate in 2 strides, pushed the rusty tube that served as a door, entered the patio, and reached where his mother was before she finished taking her 3rd step. He embraced her, felt her small in his arms, incredibly small, as if the years had been shrinking her without him realizing it. And she smelled of laundry soap, and old wool, and something sweet and very ancient that Aurelio couldn't name, but which he recognized perfectly because it was the smell of his entire childhood. Consuelo took a moment to raise her arms, as if her body needed a few seconds to convince itself that this was real. And then she raised them and hugged him back with that quiet strength that mothers who have worked all their lives possess, and said nothing more. Neither of them said anything. Behind them, the 2 bodyguards and the chauffeur looked carefully away. Gerardo pretended to check something in the rear-view mirror. The afternoon sun fell on San Isidro Polvoriento with an amber light that made even the dust on the road shine. And in the patio of that ruined house, mother and son embraced in silence, and the purple bougainvillea continued to hang its flowers over the rusty gate, as if it had been waiting for that exact moment for decades. When Aurelio finally found his voice, he buried it in his mother's white hair and said, with a calmness he didn't feel, "Why didn't you tell me anything, Mom? Why didn't you call me?" Consuelo took time to answer. When she did, her voice sounded calm. Too calm. "Because you had your life, son, and I didn't want to be a burden." Aurelio closed his eyes. A burden. His mother, 75 years old, living alone in a crumbling house, mending old clothes, saying nothing because she didn't want to be a burden. Inside him, something very cold settled, next to that broken piece of his chest. Something that wasn't sadness. Something that didn't yet have a shape, but was slowly beginning to form. Like when water starts to boil, and at first there are only small bubbles at the bottom. That something had a name, though. He wasn't ready to say it yet. It was called Rodrigo. There was a photograph in the boardroom of Montoya Constructora on the 16th floor of the Reforma Tower in Guadalajara, which none of the partners or executives had ever dared to comment on out loud. It was a small photograph framed in dark wood, hung in a corner of the wall between 2 diplomas and a recognition from the Chamber of Construction. He showed a lean, 18-year-old boy with black hair plastered to his forehead by sweat, a 50-kilogram sack of cement slung over his back. In the background, the unfinished facade of what looked like a construction site was visible. The boy stared directly at the camera with a serious, tense expression, not a trace of a smile, his dark eyes holding that particular glint found in people who haven't arrived anywhere yet, but already know exactly where they're going. That boy was Aurelio Montoya at 18, 3 weeks after arriving in Guadalajara with 200 pesos in his pocket and the address of a tenement in the Analco neighborhood, scribbled on a folded piece of paper. The date on the back of the photo read March 14, 2002, the same week he left San Isidro Polvoriento. He was 8 years old when his father died. Celestino Montoya had been a farmer and a day laborer, depending on the season and whatever work was available. A quiet man who drank moderately on Saturdays and loved his family with that discreet way men from small towns have, who don't know how to say what they feel but show it in small things, like waking before dawn so there'd be a hot breakfast, fixing a broken bicycle without being asked, or taking Consuelo to the village dance even if his feet hurt. One February morning, Celestino went to work on a construction site 12 kilometers from San Isidro. It was a site without adequate scaffolding. Most places were like that in that region, in that era, perhaps even now. and Celestino fell from the third floor because a plank gave way beneath his feet. He died before the ambulance could reach the nearest hospital. There was no insurance, no compensation. The construction boss sent 5,000 pesos to the family to help with expenses and never appeared again. Consuelo was left with 4 children: Rodrigo, 14, Graciela, 11, Aurelio, 8, and little Lupe, barely 4. There wasn't much to do in San Isidro after that. Consuelo washed other people's clothes, sewed school uniforms, sold tamales on Sundays, doing whatever she could. Rodrigo, the eldest, left school to work in the fields with Don Abundio, the owner of the ejido's largest landholdings. It was hard, poorly paid work, but it was work. Graciela helped around the house. Aurelio went to school as far as he could, and in the afternoons he carried water, gathered firewood, and ran errands for neighbors in exchange for whatever they could give him. From the age of 10, Aurelio Montoya understood something no teacher had ever taught him. The village offered no way out. Not for him, not for his dreams, which at that time were still vague and enormous, with no precise form, but which already occupied space in his chest like a growing animal. The only way to change what was to leave, and to leave one had to endure, and to endure one had to be stubborn. He was very stubborn. At 18, he finished high school. The only one in his family to do so, the only one on his block to do so. And that same week, he told his mother what he was going to do. Consuelo didn't cry. That's what Aurelio always remembered, that she didn't cry. She looked at him intently for a long moment. Then she went to the room where the 2 girls slept, opened a drawer, and took out an envelope with 200 pesos she had been saving for 2 years without telling anyone. 20 pesos here, 10 there. She gave them to him without a word, then hugged him too, without a word. And when she let go, she adjusted the collar of his shirt with that habit mothers have of fixing small things when they can't fix the big ones. "Send me a letter when you arrive," she said. That was all. Aurelio promised he would. He promised he'd return rich. He promised she would never lack anything. He promised many things at that green gate that wasn't yet rusted, with the voice young people have when they make promises they don't yet know if they can keep. And he left. The first 5 years were a war. He carried cement on construction sites, sold tortas at a stall he set up with a friend that went bankrupt in 3 months. He was a bicycle messenger. He cleaned building windows hanging from a harness that terrified him. He studied architecture at night at the University of Guadalajara, on scholarship because there was no other way. And during the day, he did whatever he could. He slept 4 or 5 hours, ate as little as possible to spend as little as possible. He sent money to San Isidro every month without fail, even if it was only 500 pesos, even if he was left with 150 for the week. During that time, he wrote letters, not emails. In San Isidro, there was no good internet signal in those years. But paper letters in his hurried handwriting, full of details about Guadalajara, about the construction site where he worked, about his colleagues, about what he saw. He asked about Graciela, about little Lupe, about the neighbors. He asked about his mother. Rodrigo never replied in writing. Sometimes, very occasionally, he would answer the phone and give brief updates. "Everything's fine here. Mom is fine. Yes, the money arrived." 3-minute conversations. Aurelio learned to be content with that. Rodrigo had never been a man of many words, not since he was a child. It was his way of being. At 25, Aurelio was already a foreman. At 28, he had his first small company. At 33, the medium-sized company bought another company. By 38, Montoya Constructora was a known name in Guadalajara's real estate development circles, and was beginning to expand into Puerto Vallarta and Los Cabos. And through all those years, he sent money without fail, without excuse. What he never did was return. He had been back to San Isidro twice. Once when Graciela got married 12 years ago, and again when Uncle Edmundo, his father's brother, died 9 years ago. Quick, uncomfortable 2-day visits. Each time he set foot in the village, he felt something he couldn't name. A mix of guilt, relief, and shame that he preferred not to examine too closely. The house seemed smaller. The village seemed quieter, and Rodrigo, who by then was managing the resources Aurelio sent, always had an explanation for anything Aurelio noticed. That's just how people in the village are. Mom doesn't want to change anything. The money just barely covers it. Aurelio believed him. Why wouldn't he? He was his brother. The trigger had been a phone call 3 weeks ago. It wasn't from Rodrigo. It was from Doña Chabela, the woman who lived 2 houses down from his mother's and who had Aurelio's number because years ago he had told her, "If you ever need anything, call me." Doña Chabela was a 70-year-old woman, nearsighted and a woman of few words, who probably had never in her life called anyone outside the municipality. She called at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday. "Look, young Aurelio, I'm not one to meddle, but your mother hasn't had anyone bring her food in 3 days, and I'm bringing her what I can from my own kitchen, but I don't have much either, and I thought perhaps you didn't know." Aurelio didn't speak for several seconds. "Rodrigo asked about his brother," she said. "He moved to Sayula about 6 months ago with his family. They bought a house there, a nice house, they say." Doña Consuelo was left alone. The call lasted 4 more minutes. When he hung up, Aurelio sat at his desk on the 16th floor, his gaze fixed on the window, looking at Guadalajara without seeing it. Then he dialed Rodrigo's number. Rodrigo didn't answer. He called 6 more times that afternoon. Nothing. The next day he called from an unknown number. Rodrigo answered on the second ring. "Hello, Rodrigo, it's Aurelio." A brief silence. "Ah, brother, what a miracle! What's going on with my mom?" "What do you mean, what's going on? Everything's fine." "Why did they tell me she hasn't eaten in days, that she lives alone, that you moved to Sayula?" Another silence, this one longer. "Look, things changed a bit around here. My wife got a job in Sayula, the kids have school there, it was more convenient for us. But Mom is fine. I check on her often." "Often, as in how often?" "Well, whenever I can, brother. You know how things are." "The money I send you, Rodrigo, the 15,000 pesos monthly, what are you using it for?" The pause this time lasted so long that Aurelio thought the call had been cut off. "Look, brother, that's a very complicated thing to explain over the phone, isn't it? Better when you come. We'll sit down." "I'll go tomorrow," Aurelio said. "Tomorrow, yes, tomorrow." And he hung up. Now he was sitting in the corridor of the adobe house, in the same old chair where his mother had sat, because Consuelo had insisted on going into the kitchen to make something to drink. And he had insisted just as strongly that she shouldn't, and they had reached the only possible agreement. She would make the tea, and he would wait without moving. One of the bodyguards had brought a bag from the Suburban with things Aurelio had bought on the way at a store in Sayula. Cookies, sweetbread, fruit, 2 liters of milk, cheese, ham, basic things. He had sent them to the kitchen with Consuelo, without saying anything, and she had received them without saying anything either, which was how the Montoyas handled difficult matters. In silence, Gerardo and the bodyguards were outside with the Suburbans, discreet as always. Aurelio looked at the patio. The mesquite tree was still there, bigger than he remembered, and cast a generous shadow over half the patio. Someone had tried to sweep the dirt recently. There were broom marks on the ground, though irregular, as if from someone sweeping slowly, because their strength wasn't enough for more. His mother. His 75-year-old mother sweeping the dirt patio of her falling-down house alone. 720,000 pesos. Aurelio took out his phone and opened his banking app. He reviewed the transfers from the last 4 years, punctual as he was, on the 15th of each month, without fail, 15,000 pesos to Rodrigo Montoya Garza's account. 720,000 pesos that had arrived in that account, and his mother sweeping alone, without eating, in a house with a cardboard roof. He heard Consuelo's slow footsteps returning from inside. He put his phone away. She carried 2 blue enamel mugs, the same mugs as always, from his entire childhood, with a cinnamon tea that smelled of his entire childhood kitchen. She placed them on a wooden box that served as a small table, as there was no table in the corridor. Then she sat on a chair Aurelio hadn't noticed before, a worn green plastic chair, the kind given away with soda purchases. So different from any furniture he had had in his house that for a moment his gaze drifted. "It's sweet," Consuelo said, gesturing to the tea. "I put 2 spoonfuls in, like when you were little." "Thank you, Mom." They drank in silence for a few moments. The sun was already setting. Soon it would be dark in San Isidro Polvoriento. And Aurelio knew that the darkness in the village was different from the darkness of the city. More complete, more ancient, without the hum of artificial light that never ceases. "How long have you been alone?" Aurelio said. It wasn't a question. Consuelo held the mug with both hands as if for warmth, though the afternoon wasn't cold. "Rodrigo comes to see me," she said in her calm voice, her usual voice. "How often?" She paused. "He visits," she repeated softly. And that was all. Aurelio looked at his mother, looked at her tired profile, the deep furrows around her mouth, the way she held the mug as if it were the only firm thing in the world, and he understood, without needing more words, that Consuelo Garza de Montoya had been covering for her eldest son for months, stretching the grocery money until there was no grocery money left, telling herself that Rodrigo would come, that everything was fine, that her children were good people because she was a mother and that's what mothers do. "Mom," Aurelio said, his voice coming out lower than he intended. "When was the last time you ate well?" Consuelo looked at him for a second, just for a second. Something stirred behind her eyes, something old and tired and tremendously honest. "Doña Chabela brought me some enchiladas yesterday," he replied, and later, as if to make up for it, they were very good. Aurelio placed his mug on the wooden box, rested his elbows on his knees, and buried his face in his hands. But this time not to hide, but to give himself a moment, just a moment, to sort through what he was feeling before it overwhelmed him. 720,000 pesos. Doña Chabela bringing enchiladas, the cardboard roof, the wire on the door, and Rodrigo Montoya Garza, his brother, living in Sayula with his family in a house Aurelio hadn't seen yet, but could already picture perfectly. He raised his face, looked at the broken roof of the porch, looked at the cracks in the walls, looked at the enormous mesquite tree that was still there, stubborn and green, the only thing in the entire yard that seemed to be all right. "Someone's coming tomorrow to look at the roof," he said. His voice was flat and final, like when he closed a deal. "Oh, son, don't trouble yourself." "I'll do it tomorrow." Consuelo looked at him for a moment, then nodded slowly with that small, absolute dignity certain older people possess, as if accepting help cost her something, but she knew it was the right thing to do. "All right," she said. They fell silent again. The afternoon was fading over dusty San Isidro. Somewhere in town, someone turned on a radio, and a few bars of something Aurelio didn't recognize played. "Mom," he said after a while, looking out at the yard. "The letters I sent you, the first few years. Did you get them?" Consuelo furrowed her brow slightly, a new line appearing on her forehead. "What letters, son?" Aurelio remained very still. "The letters. When I arrived in Guadalajara, I wrote them often. I asked Rodrigo to give them to you." His mother stared at him with that look people get when they're calculating whether what they're hearing is real or if their minds are playing tricks on them.
I never received any letters, Aurelio.
The silence that followed lasted several seconds. In those seconds, something finished taking shape within Aurelio Montoya, like water that had been boiling for a while and suddenly lets out all its steam at once. His mother never knew that he had written all those years when he thought she was receiving his letters. That she knew he thought of her, that she had his words even if he couldn't be there. All those years, his mother had believed her son had left and given no sign. That the money arrived, yes, but that there were no words, no letters, no written reminder that there was a mother waiting in dusty San Isidro. "I thought you didn't want to write to me," Consuelo said, her voice completely calm, without complaint, without tears, with that devastating peace that is worse than any accusation. "I thought you were very busy with your life." Aurelio clenched his teeth. "I wrote to you, Mom, many times." She nodded slowly, as if that explained everything, as if many pieces from many years suddenly fit together. "I know, son," she said softly. "I know." Outside, night was beginning to fall over San Isidro with that slowness of places where time doesn't run but walks. And inside that broken old porch, Aurelio Montoya had the absolute certainty that the next day he would find his brother Rodrigo, and that their conversation would be nothing like any they had had before. Rodrigo Montoya now lived at Prolongacion Morelos Street, number 44, Las Palomas neighborhood in Sayula. A quiet street of new houses with covered garages and front gardens, 40 minutes from dusty San Isidro via paved road. Aurelio had gotten the exact address in 20 minutes. He'd simply called Graciela, who lived in Guadalajara with her husband. And when she heard his brother's voice and the tone of it, she gave it to him without asking any questions. It was 9:15 in the morning when the black Suburban turned onto Prolongacion Morelos Street. Aurelio had spent the night in San Isidro, not in the adobe house. The room where he slept as a child had a roof so compromised that Gerardo, his driver, had inspected the beams with a flashlight and diplomatically suggested it might be better to find another option. Instead, he stayed at the only hotel in the municipality of Sayula, which had something resembling a decent bed, a spacious room with air conditioning, and a window overlooking the plaza. Aurelio had slept 3 hours. The rest of the night he spent sitting on the edge of the bed with his phone in his hand, reviewing numbers, thinking, letting that cold, serious thing that had settled in his chest the previous afternoon finish solidifying. Before leaving the hotel, he had breakfasted with his mother. He had sent Gerardo to buy eggs, beans, tortillas, and juice from the store, and he had cooked himself in the adobe kitchen of the house. A kitchen that smelled exactly the same as it had 30 years ago, with the same soot on the wall next to the stove and the same crack in the cement floor next to the cupboard, while Consuelo watched him from the doorway without saying anything, with that expression that mixes pride and melancholy that mothers have when they see their sons doing something they taught them. They ate together on the porch, in plastic chairs with blue enamel mugs. It was the best half-hour Aurelio had had in months, perhaps years. But now the Suburban was slowing down in front of number 44 Prolongacion Morelos Street, and Aurelio looked out the window at what was there, and the cold thing in his chest tightened a little more. It was a new house, recently built, at most 3 years old. Walls of exposed red brick with gray quarry stone accents, covered garage with translucent polycarbonate sheeting, black wrought iron gate painted with glossy enamel. Inside the garage, visible from the street, was a Ram pickup truck, no more than 2 years old, red with chrome rims. In the small, well-kept front yard, there was a young palm tree and some newly planted bougainvillea, purple like the ones at Consuelo's house, which gave Aurelio a specific, unexpected pang somewhere he couldn't name. A new house, a Ram truck, a manicured yard, and his mother mending rags in a broken chair without eating, with a cardboard roof. "Wait here," Aurelio said to his bodyguards. "Sir, protocol dictates you get out alone." He knocked on the gate 3 times with his knuckles. He waited. Inside, he could hear children's voices and the sound of a television. He knocked again, this time louder. Footsteps. The gate opened about 15 centimeters, and a woman's face appeared, one Aurelio knew but had never been close to. Marlene, Rodrigo's wife, 40 years old, brown dyed hair, wearing a housecoat, her expression immediately cautious upon seeing Aurelio. "Aurelio," he said, not as a greeting, but as a statement of an awkward fact. "Good morning. Is Rodrigo there?" "He's having breakfast. Tell him to come out." Marlene looked at him for a second, then closed the gate without another word. Aurelio waited on the sidewalk. The morning sun was already warming things up, and it smelled of wet grass because someone had watered the garden early. A dog barked 2 houses down, a child shouted something inside the house, and Marlene's voice shushed him. The gate opened again, this time wide open. Rodrigo Montoya Garza was 48 years old, and he carried it in a particular way. Not in his body, which was still sturdy and broad-shouldered as it had always been, but in his face. In that expression of a man who has learned to handle difficult situations with a calculated calm that can be mistaken for honesty if one doesn't know him well. He wore a checkered shirt unbuttoned over a white t-shirt and held a coffee mug in one hand. The posture he adopted as he opened the gate was completely deliberate, relaxed, almost casual, as if his millionaire brother's visit at 9 in the morning were something that happened often and didn't faze him in the least. "Brother," he said, a brief smile. "What a surprise! Why didn't you let me know?" Aurelio interrupted. "How long has it been since you brought my mother food, Rodrigo?" The smile didn't disappear, but it froze for just a second. Then Rodrigo took a step forward and lowered his voice, though there was no one else on the sidewalk but them. "Look, brother, I don't know what they told you, but things aren't like... I'm asking you a question. How long?" "Well, I go see her every week." "That she's abandoned is an exaggeration by gossipy neighbors who don't have... Doña Chabela isn't gossiping. Doña Chabela is 70 years old and she brought my mother enchiladas." "Because my mother had nothing to eat." Aurelio spoke without raising his voice, without gesturing, with that calm that had earned him a reputation for being ruthless in business. "The money, Rodrigo, the 15,000 pesos a month, where is it?" Rodrigo took a sip of coffee, glanced down the street, then back up. "There are expenses you don't see from there, brother. The electricity goes up, the gas goes up, food goes up, and Mom has her medications, which aren't cheap. And there was a problem with the roof last year that cost... The roof is still broken, Rodrigo. The bricklayer didn't finish, he was supposed to come back. And the roof has cardboard. Cardboard and stones, I saw it yesterday." A brief silence. "Well, that guy let us down. I'm going to complain to him about why." "And the house?" Aurelio interrupted. And now there was something in his voice that changed tone. Something that shifted up a degree, like a thermostat. "The ram was Mom's expense. The bricks for this house, too." Rodrigo tightened his grip on the coffee mug. "Look, don't come here asking how much," Aurelio said. 2 words as flat as a concrete surface. "I don't know what you're talking about. How much have you spent from the money I sent for my mom? On this house? On that truck? On whatever you've bought? How much?" Prolongacion Morelos Street was quiet at that hour. A couple of neighbors leaving for work had discreetly slowed their pace upon noticing the scene. 2 men in front of the gate, one in a suit and the other in an open shirt, with something in the air between them that had the particular density of things left unsaid for a long time. Rodrigo took a step back, into his garage, and adopted another posture, no longer casual, now defensive, his shoulders raised and his head slightly tilted. "Look, Aurelio, you left. Do you know what it's like to stay? Do you know what it's like to be the one who stays in town? The one who takes care of Mom? Who deals with everything while you build your life in Guadalajara? I sacrificed years. Years of my life that I could have used for something else. That has value." "Yes," Aurelio said. "It has value, and I paid you for it. 15,000 pesos a month. That doesn't cover everything that... The letters, Rodrigo." The question came out differently than the others, quieter, colder. Rodrigo blinked. "What letters?" "The ones I sent to Mom. The first few years, envelopes with letters inside. I asked you to give them to her." Something flickered across Rodrigo's face. Very quickly, like a passing shadow. So quickly that anyone who hadn't known him since childhood wouldn't have noticed. But Aurelio had known him since childhood. "I don't know what letters you're talking about. It's been many years since then." "She never received them." "Well, I gave them to her." "You're lying!" The word fell between them unadorned, without euphemism, without the diplomatic wrapper Aurelio used in his business dealings when he wanted to say the same thing. "You're lying. Simple and definitive, like a slammed door." Rodrigo flushed. Not with shame, but with something else. You're calling me a liar on my doorstep. Yes. Look, you bastard, Rodrigo began, and his voice changed. The veneer of calm disappeared, and it came out with its usual rough texture, the voice from when they used to fight as kids in the yard of the adobe house. You have no idea what happened here while you were living the good life in Guadalajara. You sent your little money and felt good about your conscience and never came. You never really asked, never. I came twice, and both times you told me everything was fine. It was fine. My mother, without eating, was fine. That was temporary. It was a temporary situation that was going to be resolved. Rodrigo's voice had risen enough for Marlene to appear at the house door, behind the gate, her expression tense. Two of the children peeked out beside her, a girl about 10 years old, and a younger boy with a face that showed he didn't understand what was happening but knew it was something serious. Aurelio saw them, lowered his voice a bit, not for Rodrigo but for the children. I'm going to review the bank statements for the last 4 years, he said. I have proof of every transfer I made to you, and I'm going to hire someone to check where that money was spent. If there's any legal way to get it back, I'm going to do it. Prove it, Rodrigo said, his voice still heated but his eyes already calculating. I'm already proving it. Aurelio paused for a moment, looked at his brother, looked at the new house, the red truck, the garden with bougainvillea. Do you know how much this house is worth, Rodrigo? I've already looked. In this neighborhood, they're going for 800 to 900,000 pesos. The new Ram truck. In the pasture, 400. Let's do the math. The color drained from Rodrigo's face. What had been red with anger began to take on another hue. Hey, you can't come here to threaten me in front of my family. It's not a threat. It's arithmetic. You were never here. I was here. I was the one who stayed with Mom when she got sick, the one who took her to the doctor, the one who... When did she get sick? Aurelio asked, his voice hardening suddenly. When was my mother sick? Rodrigo stopped. He had said something he hadn't intended to. Last year, a kidney infection. It wasn't serious. No one told me. Well, I didn't want to worry you. I thought... No one told me, Rodrigo. Aurelio stared at him, unblinking, with that look his partners recognized as a sign that the conversation was over, and consequences were on their way. I sent money, I sent letters, and you sent me silence. Silence while you built this house. Silence while my mother got a kidney infection alone. Silence while the roof was falling and you were putting up cardboard. Rodrigo opened his mouth, then closed it. Behind him, Marlena had ushered the children inside and then retreated herself. The scene now was just the two brothers, facing each other by the black wrought iron gate, with the 10 a.m. sun beating straight down on the street. And the neighbors, who hadn't quite finished leaving for work yet, peered from their windows with the relative discretion characteristic of small-town windows. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen, Aurelio said, his voice like that of a deal being closed. I'm going to fix my mother's house. I'm going to make sure she has everything she needs, and I'm going to talk to my lawyer about the rest. What you decide to do with that information is your business. Your lawyer. Rodrigo let out a short, humorless laugh. Hey, it's good that life went well for you, brother. It's good. But don't think that just because you have money, you can come here and give me orders in my own house. I'm not giving you orders, Aurelio said. I'm just informing you. He turned to leave. Hey! Rodrigo shouted at his back. Hey, I'm talking to you. Don't turn your back on me. Aurelio kept walking toward the Suburban. Gerardo already had the door open. The two bodyguards, who had observed everything from a discreet distance, moved to their positions. Everything you have you owe to the family. You owe it to me. I stayed when you left. Aurelio got into the vehicle, closed the door. The Suburban started up silently, with the hushed smoothness of expensive engines, and pulled out of Prolongacion Morelos Street without haste. Rodrigo stood on the sidewalk in front of his gate, coffee cup in hand, his shirt unbuttoned, watching the black Suburban drive away. On his face was something more than just rage. It was the beginning of fear. The kind of fear that arrives when you realize the person who just spoke to you wasn't threatening or exaggerating, but simply stating what they are going to do. 2 houses down, behind a blind, a neighbor tucked away the snippet of conversation she'd overheard with the same care one might store something valuable. In San Isidro Polvoriento, by the time evening fell, the whole town would know what had happened that morning on Prolongacion Morelos Street, and half of them had already suspected it for a long time. When Aurelio returned to San Isidro Polvoriento at midday, he found his mother where he'd left her, on the porch, in the green plastic chair, sewing. Always sewing. She'd learned as a child. She'd told Aurelio once, when he was about 6 and asked her why she sewed so much, "Because broken things don't fix themselves, son. Someone has to pick up the needle." She had said it without intending to teach anything. It was simply the honest answer of a practical woman. But Aurelio had carried it with him all these years without realizing it. And more than once, in the midst of a difficult negotiation or a project that threatened to collapse, he had heard that voice in some corner of his mind. Someone has to pick up the needle. Today, his mother was sewing a pair of navy blue fabric pants, old with a torn hem, probably for a neighbor who brought her clothes to mend in exchange for whatever they could. Consuelo didn't look up when she heard the Suburban, but her hands paused for a second, just a second. Before continuing, Aurelio sat in the chair next to her. He didn't say anything right away. 2 more trucks, which he had called from the hotel that morning, arrived behind him. A foreman he knew from a project in Sayula, with 3 workers and materials for an urgent assessment of the roof and walls. The foreman, a robust 50-year-old man named Don Fortino, who owed Aurelio 2 significant favors, got out with his crew, greeted Consuelo with his hat in his hand, and began walking around the perimeter of the house with a notepad and a tape measure, measuring, jotting down notes, pointing things out to his assistants in a low voice. Consuelo watched them silently for a moment, then returned to her sewing. "You didn't have to bring people today," she said. "I know," Aurelio replied. "Tomorrow would have been fine too." "Yes," a pause. "Did you go see Rodrigo?" she asked, without turning, without changing the rhythm of her needle. "Yes." A long silence. Don Fortino and his men climbed onto the roof via a ladder they had brought. The sound of footsteps on the tiles, technical murmurs, the dull thud of someone testing the solidity of a beam could be heard. "How is he?" Consuelo asked. Aurelio looked at her, at that serene, worn profile, those hands that didn't stop. That question asked in a completely neutral voice, without irony, without complaint. Genuine. His mother was genuinely asking about her son who had left her without eating. "Fine," Aurelio said, because there was no other possible answer to that question at that moment. "His children have grown so much," Consuelo said. "The oldest girl is already in secondary school. Her name is Itzel, like Marlene's mother. She's a good girl. When they used to visit me, she'd bring me drawings she made at school." Aurelio said nothing. "Did they fight?" Consuelo asked, still without turning. "We talked. Did they fight?" she repeated, with an infinite patience that made it impossible not to answer honestly. "Yes." A very brief knot appeared in Consuelo's throat and then disappeared. Her hands continued sewing. "I don't want you to fight over me," Mama said. "Rodrigo has his things, his family, his problems. You have yours. I don't want to be the reason siblings fight." Aurelio clenched his jaw. He breathed. "Mom, he used the money I sent for you to build his house, to buy his truck." "I don't know anything about that," Consuelo said, her voice suddenly sounding slightly different. Not colder, not exactly, more careful. "Yes, you do know? What I know and what I don't know is my business, son. It's my business too. It's my money and it's your well-being. My well-being I manage myself." "Did you manage it when you didn't have anything to eat?" The silence that followed lasted several seconds. From the roof came the sounds of Don Fortino and his men, the creak of a tile being lifted, a low, technical conversation about beams and moisture. Somewhere in the yard, one of the helpers had found the water faucet and turned it on to check the pressure. Consuelo folded the pants over her lap with careful movements, placed the needle in the thimble, and looked up at the mesquite tree in the yard, which swayed very gently in a breeze Aurelio barely felt. "When your father died," she said, with the voice of someone beginning a story they've kept for a long time, "I was 38 years old, 4 children, nothing but the house and my hands." "I know, Mom." "No, you don't know. Do you know the outside part?" She paused briefly. "Rodrigo was 14 years old and was the man of the house from one day to the next. 14 years old. Aurelio. He left school because I couldn't handle everything alone. He worked in Don Abundio's fields for 3 years with a shameful salary, but it was what there was. He never complained." "I know," Aurelio said more quietly. "When you left, Rodrigo was 24. He already had Marlene. He already wanted his own life, but he stayed a few more years with me because I asked him to stay." "I asked him to stay, Aurelio." She emphasized that "I" without raising her voice. "It wasn't fair, I know. But he stayed." Aurelio listened without interrupting. "Then, when your money started arriving, well..." Consuelo made a vague gesture with her hand. "I don't know exactly what it was spent on. I know things didn't always arrive as they should, but Rodrigo has his family, his expenses, and I didn't want to be going through his accounts as if he were my employee. He's my son. And he used being your son as an excuse to steal his brother's money, Aurelio." Consuelo's voice came out with a very soft edge, like those kitchen knives that cut without a sound. "Rodrigo isn't perfect. None of my children are perfect. You aren't either. I didn't steal anything. No, but you left and didn't come back. That hurts too, son. That hurts too, even if no one tells you." Aurelio opened his mouth, then closed it. Something in those words reached him in a specific place. A place that had been very protected for many years by layers of work and achievements and reasonable excuses. "I sent you money every month," he said, and the phrase sounded weaker than he intended. "Yes," Consuelo nodded. "I thanked you for it. I always thanked you for it. But money doesn't come to sit here with you. Money doesn't ask you how you slept. Money doesn't hug you when your back hurts from so much work." She paused. "I'm not blaming you, Aurelio. It's over. I'm just telling you how things are." Silence. Don Fortino came down from the roof by the ladder, notepad in hand, and approached Aurelio with a respectful step. "Licenciado, I've finished the inspection. I'll tell you in a moment," Aurelio said, without taking his eyes off his mother. Don Fortino stepped back a few paces and waited by the gate. "Mom," Aurelio said slowly, "the letters." "None of them ever arrived." Consuelo looked at him this time, directly, with those dark eyes that Aurelio had always thought were the most honest eyes he had ever seen. "None," she said. "I wrote to you often, in the first years, every 2 or 3 weeks. I told you everything, what the city was like, where I worked, what I ate. I asked about Graciela and Lupe. One time I sent you a photo." She paused. "I put them in the envelope with your name, and gave them to Rodrigo when I called him. He told me he delivered them to you." Consuelo fell silent. She looked at her hands on the folded pants. "I thought you didn't want to write to me," she said, with the same calm voice from the previous night. But this morning, in broad daylight, Aurelio could see what that voice didn't say. The effort it took to keep it calm, the active, voluntary effort of not letting what she felt show on the surface. "I thought you were very busy," she continued. "That you had your life, which is normal, you know? That children leave and life takes them elsewhere, and you can't expect them to remember you the same way." A very small pause. But it did hurt. Sometimes it did hurt. Aurelio felt something he couldn't quite classify. It wasn't guilt exactly, because guilt has a defined shape. It has edges. This was more like a cavity, a hollow in his chest that revealed the space of all that should have been there and wasn't. 22 years. 22 years his mother believed her son had left and hadn't written. "Mama," he said, and his voice came out with a different texture, rougher, like when you speak from a place that's very dusty and not often used. I never forgot you. Not for a single day. Consuelo looked at him. I know, son, she said, and in her voice there was something Aurelio took a moment to identify. Certainty. Not certainty acquired now, but certainty she had carried in silence all this time against all apparent evidence. The stubborn, irrational certainty of a mother who decides to believe in her son, even when the years and the silence tell her otherwise. I know. I always knew. Then why didn't you call me? Why didn't you tell me the letters weren't arriving, that the money wasn't enough, that the roof was falling apart? Because you had to live your life, Aurelio. I can't be pulling you back here every time something goes wrong. That's not fair to you. And it is fair to you. Consuelo smiled. It was a small, almost invisible smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes but is completely real. I'm fine, she said. You weren't fine, Mama. You didn't have anything to eat. That was only for a few days. One manages, one doesn't manage. That doesn't fix itself. Aurelio used that soft tone again, the one that cut without making a sound. But you're here now. You're here. That's what matters now. Aurelio looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Not because he agreed that everything else didn't matter, but because he understood that with his mother, there were moments when insisting was like insisting the mesquite tree in the patio grow in another direction. May I tell you what Don Fortino says about the roof? He asked. Tell me. Aurelio gestured to the foreman, who approached with his notebook. Good afternoon, ma'am. Don Fortino spoke with the direct simplicity of construction men. The roof has 3 main beams that have already given out. They need to be replaced completely. 70% of the tiles are bad, some broken, others rotted from the moisture that got in. The north wall has a structural crack that needs to be addressed before it continues to spread. The electrical installation is a risk. The wires are spliced without tape, and one is bare next to the kitchen. How long to repair it all? Aurelio asked. Done right? With quality materials, a week. 10 days if we want to include plastering the walls and painting. When can you start? Tomorrow if you authorize it. I have the materials available at the hardware store in Sayula. Authorized. Aurelio didn't ask the cost. Don Fortino knew him well and knew that was a signal to do things right, not cheap. The foreman nodded, thanked them, and returned to his men. Consuelo had listened to everything without interrupting. Now she looked at the roof of the corridor, the one that sagged on the right side, with cardboard secured by stones, with an expression Aurelio hadn't seen on her face since he arrived. Something that, from a great distance, resembled relief. You didn't have to do all that, she said. I did. It's going to cost a lot. It doesn't matter, Aurelio, she said, her voice firm but not severe. The money you brought is yours. You don't owe anything. I don't owe anything, Mama. You have money for your expenses. I have money for my expenses. You have savings. Despite everything, Aurelio felt something in him wanted to smile. His mother, in a house with a broken roof and nothing to eat, asking him if he had savings. I have savings, he said. Good. Consuelo picked up the pants from her lap and looked for her needle in the thimble. Then it's fine. They continued to sit in silence for a while longer. Don Fortino and his men were taking measurements inside the house. Gerardo and the bodyguards had settled discreetly under the mesquite tree in the patio, in the shade, drinking water from a bottle someone had brought from the Suburban. It was a different silence than the night before. Less heavy, still full of unsaid things, but with a little more space between them. Like when a window is opened and a bit of air enters a room that has been closed for a long time. Mama, Aurelio said after a while, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Consuelo didn't look up from her sewing, but her hand stopped for a fraction of a second. How long have you been covering for Rodrigo? A long silence. Her hand started moving again. What do you mean by covering? Telling me you're fine when you're not calling me when the money wasn't arriving, defending him when I ask you? The needle went in and out of the navy blue fabric 3 times before Consuelo answered. Rodrigo is my son, she said. Just like you, no matter what he does, he's my son. That doesn't answer my question. It does. A pause. A mother doesn't choose between her children. I can't make you be okay at the cost of Rodrigo being bad, even if he deserves it. Another pause. Even though I know he deserves it. It was the first time Consuelo Garza de Montoya had admitted aloud, even in that oblique and careful way, that she knew more than she had said. Aurelio didn't press further. But he didn't need to. What his mother had just told him in those 3 sentences was more than she had said all the previous night. Even though I know he deserves it. Consuelo knew, perhaps not the exact details, perhaps not the figures, but she knew. She had known for some time that something wasn't right, that the money arriving wasn't arriving in full, that Rodrigo's explanations had cracks, and she had chosen silence, not out of cowardice, not out of ignorance, but out of that peculiar and sometimes incomprehensible decision some mothers make to protect their children, even when the child needing protection is the one causing the harm. Aurelio looked at the mesquite tree. When was the last time you cried, Mama? Consuelo frowned slightly, as if the question caught her by surprise, not for what it asked, but for when it was asked. Why are you asking me that? Because I see you sewing the whole time I've been here, sewing. And I wonder, when was the last time you stopped and said, "This hurts," and let it hurt? Silence. Things that hurt don't get fixed by crying them away, Consuelo said. But this time her voice didn't come out completely firm. It had an irregular edge, very small, like the edge of a fabric about to unravel. They don't get fixed by sewing them either, Aurelio said softly. Consuelo lowered the pants to her lap, looked at her hands on the dark fabric, those hands with stained knuckles and rough skin and veins that stood out much more than before. And then something happened that Aurelio didn't expect. His mother started to cry. It wasn't a dramatic cry. It wasn't the kind of crying you see in movies with shaking shoulders and sobs audible from afar. It was a very quiet, very contained cry that began simply with 2 tears that escaped her eyes without asking permission from anything, and slid down the furrows of her face with a slowness that spoke of much practice in holding them back. Consuelo didn't cover her face, didn't look away. She kept looking at her hands and let the tears fall, and said nothing. Aurelio said nothing either. He placed his large hand, the hand of a man who has carried heavy things all his life, of a man who signs important documents, of a man who doesn't remember the last time he touched someone with tenderness, over his mother's hands, covering them completely, and stayed there. Don Fortino, who was coming out from inside with his notebook, saw them from the corridor door and turned back silently. He went back inside the house and told his workers in a whisper to take a break. The mesquite tree swayed. The purple bougainvillea hung its flowers over the rusty gate. And in the broken corridor of that house, which was just beginning to be rescued from oblivion, a mother was finally crying the tears she had been sowing for years. And her son stood quietly beside her, learning that some things aren't fixed with money or with lawyers or with well-spoken words, but simply by being present, with an outstretched hand, without speaking. When the tears stopped, as slowly as they had come, Consuelo took a handkerchief from her blouse pocket, used it sparingly, and adjusted her rebozo over her shoulders. "All ready," she said, as if closing a drawer. "All ready," said Aurelio. Pause. "Are you hungry?" Consuelo asked, her voice completely recovered. "Yes. There are beans from this morning and tortillas, and with what you brought yesterday I can make something else if you want." "The beans are fine, Mama. With cheese, with cheese." Consuelo got up from her chair with that slow, careful movement of someone who treats her body well. She picked up the mended pants and walked towards the kitchen without haste. Aurelio remained seated in the corridor, looking at the patio, his hand still resting on his knee, as if the warmth of his mother's hands were still there. Outside the gate, on the dirt street of San Isidro Polvoriento, someone passed walking slowly. It was an old woman with a black rebozo who looked into the patio as she passed. She saw the two black Suburbans, the foreman and his men, and Aurelio's figure, sitting in the corridor of Consuelo's house, and continued walking without saying anything. But she had seen. And in San Isidro Polvoriento, for something to be seen was the same as being said. And what was going to be said that afternoon, from mouth to mouth through the streets of the town, was this: that Consuelo's son had returned, the one who became a millionaire, and that he had arrived with 2 black trucks and a foreman, and that something was happening in the adobe house on the main street, which in recent months everyone had seen deteriorate without daring to say anything out loud. Something was happening, and it hadn't finished happening yet. Doña Remedios Castellanos lived in the 3rd house on the right, counting from the corner of the main street of San Isidro, Polvoriento, in a house smaller than Consuelo's but better preserved, with pots of red geraniums on the corridor, and an image of the Virgin of Guadalupe framed next to the door that had been there for so many years that the paint on the wall around it had taken the exact shape of the frame, as if the Virgin had left her shadow on the adobe. She was 73 years old. She had been a rural teacher for 30 of them before retiring and carried that history in a specific way. She spoke with the precision of someone accustomed to being understood. She looked people directly in the eye when she spoke to them and had never in her life said anything she didn't want to say or kept silent about something that needed to be said. She was, in other words, the type of person who in small towns becomes collective memory without intending to. Aurelio had known her since he was a child. Doña Remedios had been his 3rd-grade teacher. He remembered her voice explaining fractions with a patience that, at the time, seemed superhuman to him. He also remembered that she was the only teacher who didn't use a ruler to rap knuckles, and that when a student did something wrong, she would look at them in a way that was far more effective than any blow. When he arrived at her door that afternoon, it was 4:30, and the sun was beginning to lose its strength over the roofs of San Isidro. Doña Remedios opened before he finished knocking, as if she had been expecting him, as if she had seen the black Suburbans pass down the street from her window, because she almost certainly had seen them, and had calculated that at some point during the day this man would arrive at her door. "Aurelio Montoya," she said, looking at him with eyes that had lost none of their clarity in 30 years. "It's good you came, Doña Remedios." She gestured inward. "May I come in?" "I was already expecting you." The house smelled of freshly brewed coffee and some flowers Aurelio didn't recognize. Doña Remedios led him to the living room, a small space with 2 floral fabric armchairs and a coffee table on which sat 2 cups of coffee and a plate of piloncillo cookies, confirming she had indeed been expecting him. They sat. Aurelio picked up his cup. He didn't drink immediately. "You know why I came," he said. "I can imagine." Doña Remedios cradled her cup in both hands. "Your mother. My mother. And what happened with the money I used to send, and with the letters?" A brief silence. Doña Remedios took a calm sip of coffee. "How much do you know?" she asked. "I know Rodrigo used the money for himself. I know my mother never received the letters. I know she's been living alone for months, and no one has been bringing her food." He paused. "I know you saw it all." Doña Remedios placed her cup back on its saucer with care. "I'm 73 years old, Aurelio, and in these 73 years I've learned there are things you see and keep to yourself. And there are things you see, and if you keep them to yourself, you become an accomplice." She looked him directly in the eye. "What was happening with your mother reached a point where I couldn't stay silent any longer. That's why I called Doña Chabela, who has your number." "Why didn't you call me directly?" "Because I didn't have your number. And because I thought if I called you myself, you'd think I was just some village gossip butting into things that weren't my business. Chabela visited your house often. You would have believed her." It was perfectly sound logic. Aurelio nodded. How long has this been going on, Doña Remedios? The retired teacher took a slow breath. I don't know the exact details about the money. I have no way of knowing what arrived and what didn't at your mother's house. But what I can tell you is what I saw. She began to recount, with the same didactic clarity she used when explaining fractions. About 2 years ago, I started noticing that Consuelo was more strained than usual. Before, she used to go to the market on Thursdays. She stopped. When I asked her, she said her knees wouldn't let her walk that far anymore. That could be true. She's 75. But I also noticed her pantry was looking rather bare. Once, she invited me for coffee. It was chicory coffee, the cheap kind that tastes like dirt. Consuelo always drank bean coffee, always, for as long as I've known her. Aurelio listened, motionless. Rodrigo would come, yes, but less and less. At first he came every week, then every 15 days, then only once in a while. And when he came, he wouldn't stay long. He'd arrive, leave some money or sometimes nothing, and then leave. I'd see it from my porch. A pause. About 8 months ago, he stopped coming altogether. He'd send one of his sons from time to time, the older boy, Cristobal, with a 200 peso bill. 200 pesos, Aurelio. Something tightened in Aurelio's stomach. And my mother didn't say anything. Your mother never says anything. You know that better than I do. She's the proudest, quietest woman I've ever known in my life. And I say that with all due respect because she is also the kindest woman. But that combination of pride and kindness sometimes makes people endure things they shouldn't. She paused briefly. I offered her money 3 times. 3 times she refused, saying she was fine, that Rodrigo would come. All 3 times. Aurelio placed his cup back on the small table. Doña Remedios, the letters. Do you know anything about the letters? The woman looked at him for a moment, then rose from her armchair with an agility that belied her years, and walked to an old piece of furniture against the wall, a dark wooden display cabinet with drawers below. She opened the center drawer, took something out, returned to her armchair, and placed a folded manila envelope on the table in front of Aurelio. Aurelio looked at it without touching it yet. What is this? About a year ago, Doña Remedios said, her voice quiet, I ran into Rodrigo coming out of Don Macario's store. He was carrying some things in bags. A small bag he had hanging from his arm fell, and what he was carrying spilled out. She paused. I helped him pick it up. Among the things that spilled were 3 or 4 old envelopes. I picked one up without him noticing, because I saw your mother's name written on it. I recognized the handwriting and thought it was yours, though I hadn't seen it in years. Aurelio reached out and took the envelope. The manila envelope was yellowed with age. On the front, in the tight, vertical script he'd had in his youth, and now recognized with a mixture of strangeness and familiarity, was written, For Mama, Consuelo Garza de Montoya. And below, in a different ink, as if added later, San Isidro, Polvoriento, Jalisco. The handwriting was his. There was no doubt. He opened it. Inside was a sheet of graph paper folded in 4, the kind of paper used in high school notebooks. Aurelio unfolded it carefully, as the creases were fragile from so many years. Guadalajara, June 23, 2002. Mama, I've been here 3 months now, and I think I'm getting used to it a little, though it still feels strange. I'm working on a construction site in the Colonia Americana, hauling materials. But the foreman says if I keep doing well, he might promote me to assistant bricklayer, which pays a bit more. The room where I live is small but clean, and the landlady is a good person. She gives me breakfast included on Sundays. How are you? How is Graciela? Tell her to study. And Lupe has already lost the front teeth that were hanging loose. Remind me when her birthday is, because the days here go by so fast, and I don't want to forget it. I sent 200 pesos with Rodrigo. I know it's not much, but I'll send more as soon as I can. Don't worry about me. I'm fine. I work hard, but I'm fine. Your son who loves you, Aurelio. Aurelio read the letter twice. Then he folded it with the same care with which he had opened it and placed it on the table. He was 24 years old when he wrote that. He had arrived in Guadalajara 3 months earlier with 200 pesos and the address of a boarding house. He had spent 3 months hauling cement and sleeping in a small room, sending what little he could and thinking of his mother and asking about his sisters. And that letter never arrived. Rodrigo was carrying more envelopes, he asked, his voice completely flat. Yes, but I only managed to recover this one. He picked up the others before I could get a good look. Approximately how many were there? 3 or 4 more, all old, the same color. A pause. Aurelio, I don't know where he was going with those envelopes. Perhaps he was going to throw them away. Perhaps he had kept them all this time for some reason I don't understand. What I do know is that your mother never saw them, because if she had, she would have told me. Consuelo tells me the things that matter to her, even if she doesn't tell me everything. Aurelio remained silent for a moment. Then he picked up the envelope from the table and put it in the inner pocket of his jacket. Thank you, Doña Remedios, he said. Don't thank me. The retired teacher looked at him with her usual direct gaze. What are you going to do? Fix what can be fixed and what cannot be fixed. Aurelio thought of his mother crying silently on the porch, her hands on her navy blue pants. He thought of the phrase, even if I know they deserve it. Learn to live with them, Doña Remedios said. He nodded. He picked up his coffee cup, then said, without drama, as if making a meteorological observation, Your mother waited for you all these years, you know. She wasn't saying it. She was never going to say it, but I've known her since I arrived in this town 40 years ago, and I know the difference between someone who has resigned herself and someone who is waiting. Consuelo was waiting. A pause. You're here now. Don't leave again. Aurelio looked at the red geraniums on the porch through the open door. The afternoon sun made them shine with an almost unreal intensity. I'm not leaving, he said. He didn't know exactly what that meant yet. He had his businesses in Guadalajara, his employees, his projects. He couldn't simply stay in dusty San Isidro permanently, but as he said it, he knew it was true in a way that transcended logistics. Something in him had returned to stay, even if his body had to continue traveling. He said goodbye to Doña Remedios on the porch, among the red geraniums and the Virgin of Guadalupe with her shadow etched into the adobe. He walked back to his mother's house under the afternoon sun, his left hand in the pocket of his jacket, feeling the outline of the yellow envelope through the fabric. He was 24 years old when he wrote that. That letter was 24 years old and smelled of old paper and the 3 most difficult months of his life, and his mother never read it. When he reached the patio, he found Consuelo sitting under the mesquite tree in the shade with a cup of tea. Don Fortino's workers had already left, but they had left some of the materials stacked by the north wall. New partition walls, buckets of mortar, rolls of roofing felt. The house was still broken, but it was beginning to look like something being attended to rather than something being ignored. Consuelo watched him arrive without asking anything. Aurelio sat on the ground with his back against the trunk of the mesquite tree at his feet, just as he did when he was 8 years old, and she would shell peas in this very shade. And he would sit there and talk about whatever he wanted without anyone asking him what he wanted to talk about. He took the envelope from his pocket and placed it on Consuelo's lap without saying a word. She looked at it, took it with both hands, and read her own name on the front in that tight, vertical script. Her fingers traced the letters with a slowness that was not doubt but recognition. She opened it, read. Aurelio didn't look at her as she read. He looked at the patio, the stacked new bricks, the purple bougainvillea over the trellis. He heard the sounds of the town at dusk, someone calling their chickens, a motorcycle engine in the distance, the church bells striking 6. When she finished reading, Consuelo folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, and clutched the envelope between her hands as if it were something that could break. She said nothing for a long while. Then she said, her voice this time indeed having an uneven edge, the voice that frays when the fabric can no longer hold. How many letters did you send? Many, Aurelio said. I don't remember exactly. The first 3 or 4 years in a row, then less, but many. Consuelo squeezed the envelope a little tighter. All these letters, she said slowly, as if measuring the weight of each word. All these years thinking you weren't writing to me, that you were too busy, that you had forgotten. You never forgot me. I know, son, I know. A pause. But knowing is not the same as feeling, and for many years I felt like you had forgotten. Aurelio lowered his head. I'm sorry, Mama. I should have come sooner. I should have checked. I should have— Stop, Consuelo said, with gentle firmness. It's over now. You're here, and I know the truth. She looked at the envelope in her hands. Are there more letters? I don't know where the others are. Doña Remedio only recovered this one. Consuelo nodded slowly. It doesn't matter, she said. And in the way she said it, with that quiet certainty of someone who has decided that one piece is enough to reconstruct the whole, Aurelio understood that his mother was and had always been much stronger than anything life or her children had thrown at her. The sun finished setting over dusty San Isidro, and mother and son sat under the mesquite tree in the slowly arriving darkness, with a 24-year-old letter between them that was also, in a way, a bridge. Lawyer Armando Cervantes had his office on the second floor of a cream-colored building on Juarez Avenue in Sayula, with a brass plaque on the door that read Cervantes, no associates, civil and commercial law. He was the most respected lawyer in the municipality, not because he was the most expensive, but because in 20 years of practice he had never lost a case that deserved to be won. Aurelio knew him from a land purchase deal he had handled in the region 5 years prior. He was a 55-year-old man, slender, with dark-rimmed glasses and a habit of taking notes by hand, even when a computer sat before him, because he believed handwritten words were better remembered. He called Aurelio at 8 a.m. on the third day. Licenciado, I need to see you today. How urgent is it? They had met at 10 a.m. the previous day. Aurelio explained the situation in 20 minutes, with the same efficiency he used to present projects to his partners. Facts, dates, numbers. No unnecessary embellishments. He presented the bank statements with the transfers, documented evidence of the house's deterioration, Doña Remedios' testimony, the recovered letter, and the plight of Consuelo, 75 years old, alone, without food, in a house with severe structural damage, while the money sent for her upkeep had funded the construction of the house and the purchase of his brother's truck. Licenciado Cervantes took notes the entire time without interruption. When Aurelio finished, he reviewed what he had written, turned the page, and started from the beginning. All right, he said. First, the house where your mother lives. In whose name is it? In my mother's name. My grandfather built it. It has never belonged to anyone else. The deeds are in the house. I found them yesterday in a box under my mother's bed. They are in order. Does your brother have any power of attorney over the property or over your mother? Not that I know of, but I need to verify it. We'll verify it today. He jotted something down. Second, the money. You have proof of transfers for 4 years, 15,000 pesos monthly to your brother Rodrigo Montoya's account, with the documented purpose being your mother's maintenance. Do you have that in writing anywhere? Messages, emails, anything that clearly states what the money was for? Aurelio took out his phone, opened WhatsApp, and searched for the conversation with Rodrigo. He placed it on the desk in front of the lawyer. Licenciado Cervantes put on his glasses and read in silence for several minutes. His expression didn't change, but his pen moved across the paper several times. Here are several messages where you explicitly ask your brother if your mother received the money, and he confirms she did. That's relevant. He looked up. Do you have more conversations from previous years? The last 2 years' conversations. I lost the earlier ones when I changed phones. This is sufficient to establish the purpose of the transfers. The licenciado returned to his notes. Now, the practical question. What do you want to achieve with this? Aurelio thought for a moment. I want 3 things, he said. First, for my mother to be legally protected, that no one can take her house or make decisions about her assets without her explicit consent. Second, for what Rodrigo did to be documented. Not necessarily for a trial, but so that a record exists. Third, for Rodrigo to know that this record exists. Licenciado Cervantes nodded slowly. The first is simple. We'll place a family trust on your mother's house, protecting it from any legal action by third parties, including family members. We can also establish an exclusive account in her name, with no additional signatories, to which you transfer directly. A pause. The second requires a bit more work, but it's feasible. With the transfer receipts and the WhatsApp messages, we can draft an affidavit before a notary of the facts. It's not a criminal complaint, but it's a document that exists and has a date. He looked at Aurelio. As for the third, if you want your brother to know this document exists, we'll simply inform him through me, in writing with a certified copy. That usually has a way of focusing attention. Something very close to a smile flickered across Aurelio's face. The first in 3 days. Proceed with everything, he said. When can you have the first part ready? The family trust and the new account in 48 hours, the notarized affidavit in a week. If you give me all the documentation today, I'll deliver it to you today. He left Licenciado Cervantes' office at 12:15 p.m. The midday sun in Sayula was relentless, carrying the scent of hot dust and fried foods from a nearby stall. Gerardo was waiting in the Suburban, the air conditioning on. That afternoon, back in San Isidro, Aurelio supervised the commencement of work on Consuelo's house. Don Fortino had arrived with his men at 7 a.m., and they had already dismantled the 3 rotten beams of the porch. The yard was full of debris, dust, and the sound of mortar being prepared in a blue plastic tub. Consuelo had established her territory in the kitchen, preparing hibiscus water for the workers with that automatic hospitality common to village women, even when they had little to give. And Aurelio, whenever he poked his head in, found her perfectly calm amidst the chaos of the construction, as if she had lived her whole life waiting for someone to fix what was broken. What Aurelio didn't expect was the afternoon's visitor. It was 4 p.m. when a taxi that made the Sayula-San Isidro route stopped in front of the house. Rodrigo stepped out. He looked different from the morning of the previous day. Buttoned shirt, dress pants, clean shoes, his hair combed, like someone attending an important meeting who had decided to present himself in a certain way. Aurelio saw him arrive from the porch where he was reviewing the progress of the new beams with Don Fortino. He excused himself from the foreman and went out to the yard. The two brothers looked at each other across the debris-filled yard with the noise of the construction in the background. "Is my mother here?" Rodrigo asked. His voice had lost the aggressive edge of the previous morning. It now sounded cautious, measured. "She's in the kitchen." Rodrigo nodded. Then he looked at the construction around him, the new beams, the stacked bricks, the workers, the white dust of the fresh mortar. "How long will it take?" he said. "A week, 10 days. And the cost? That's not your problem." Rodrigo clenched his jaw, but didn't reply. He looked again at the yard, the house, the walls with the old plaster partially chipped away where the cracks would be filled. "Hey," he said, his voice tinged with an inflection Aurelio hadn't recognized in years. It was Rodrigo's voice, without the polished veneer, without the calculated calm or defensive aggression. The voice from below. "Hey, Aurelio, what?" Aurelio started, then stopped. "It wasn't like you think. Tell me how it happened." Rodrigo looked at the ground, the debris, the dirt of the yard that the workers had removed to fill the trench along the north wall. "At first, I did use the money for what it was for Mom, for the house, groceries, medication." Then, Marlene got pregnant again. The 4th pregnancy, and this one is coming with a heart problem. He needs surgery when he's born. That costs a fortune. And I didn't have it. I didn't know how much it would cost, the surgery. Aurelio interrupted. Rodrigo looked at him. "What?" "The baby's surgery. How much does it cost?" "Well, the doctor said between 150,000 and 200,000 pesos, depending." "I'll give you the money for the surgery," Aurelio said. Rodrigo froze. What? The money for your son's surgery, I'll give it to you, Aurelio spoke without raising his voice, without drama, looking his brother directly in the eye. But listen to me carefully, Rodrigo. That money is for the surgery, not for anything else. I'll deposit it directly to the hospital when they have a date. It won't pass through your hands, do you understand? Rodrigo's mouth opened. It took several seconds for him to close it. Why? He asked. Not in gratitude, but as a genuine question from someone who didn't grasp the mechanics of what had just occurred. Because he's my nephew, and because if I had a problem like that and couldn't afford to solve it, I would have wanted someone to help me. A brief pause. What you did with my mother's money has no excuse, and Licenciado Cervantes knows it, and the notary in Sayula knows it, and everyone who needs to know will know it. You can't change that now. But your son's surgery isn't to blame for anything either. Rodrigo looked at him with an expression Aurelio hadn't seen on his face since they were children. An unvarnished, naked expression. And Mom, he said very softly. Mom is fine. She'll be better. Aurelio paused. That's also resolved, and also irreversible. Rodrigo nodded slowly. He looked again at the construction. The workers were putting up the first new beam, which still smelled of fresh wood, on the porch roof that had been sinking for years. Can I see her? He asked. She's in the kitchen. Rodrigo crossed the yard carefully, navigating the debris. He knocked on the kitchen door. Consuelo's voice could be heard from inside, and then the door opened and closed. Aurelio didn't hear what happened in the kitchen. He didn't try to. He stayed on the porch with Don Fortino, reviewing the progress of the new beams, asking technical questions about the type of wood and its resistance to weight and humidity, letting the sounds of the construction fill the space. 12 minutes later, Rodrigo emerged from the kitchen. His eyes were red, but his face was composed. He crossed the yard without looking at Aurelio, reached the gate, and stopped. Aurelio, he said without turning. What? A long pause. I'm sorry, he said. 2 dry words, unadorned, without the embellishments that make apologies insincere. These were sincere, or at least as sincere as Rodrigo could produce at that moment. Aurelio didn't reply immediately. I know, he finally said. Rodrigo walked out through the gate, down the dirt road toward the taxi stand, hands in his pockets, head slightly bowed. He didn't look back. That night, in the dusty town of San Isidro, a story circulated. As all stories circulate in small towns, from mouth to mouth, from porch to porch, through the shops and dining tables and the ladies' WhatsApp groups. The story said that Consuelo's son, the one who had become a millionaire in Guadalajara, had returned, had the house repaired, had confronted Rodrigo, and Rodrigo had come to see his mother and left with teary eyes. The story had different versions depending on who told it. Some said Aurelio had threatened Rodrigo with jail, others that he had forgiven him everything, others that he had given him money, others that he had taken away the house in Sayula. No version was entirely accurate, but all shared a core. Something had been corrected. Something that was crooked had been straightened. And in small towns, where injustice is seen every day and rarely spoken aloud, that core was enough. Doña Remedios learned of it from Doña Chavela at 8 p.m. and turned off her bedroom light, feeling completely at peace for the first time in months. Don Abundio, the owner of the large ejido lands, who had watched the Montoyas grow up and had never had much opinion about Aurelio in particular, told his wife that night before sleeping, "That boy turned out well." And in the adobe kitchen, with the new beams in place and the smell of fresh mortar still in the air, Consuelo Garza de Montoya washed the day's dishes, hers, Aurelio's, the workers who had drunk hibiscus water, with that rhythmic and calm motion she had for everything. Then she dried her hands on her usual kitchen towel and stood for a moment looking out the small window that opened onto the patio, where the mesquite tree was dark under the moonless night. In her blouse pocket, she carried the yellow envelope with the 24-year-old letter. He had carried it there all day. He hadn't reread it. He didn't need to. He just needed to know it was there, that it had been there all along, that her son had never forgotten her. 5 days after work began, Consuelo Garza de Montoya's house had a new roof. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a real roof of fresh timber beams and new fired clay tiles, sealed with waterproofing and finished with a layer of terracotta-colored paint that Don Fortino had personally chosen, saying it was the color that held up best in the region's climate. The walls had been plastered, the cracks filled with a mixture of lime and sand, and the north wall, the one with the structural crack, had received a special treatment that the foreman explained in technical terms, which Consuelo listened to attentively, though she probably didn't understand half of it, nodding with that absolute courtesy she had for everything. The electrical installation had been completely replaced. New wiring, new outlets, 2 additional sockets in the kitchen. Don Fortino had insisted on this with more vehemence than anything else. The exposed wire next to the stove was, in his words, a scare waiting to happen, and Aurelio had given his authorization without argument. The main door now had a new lock with 2 keys because Aurelio went to the hardware store in Sayula and saw a wrought iron knocker that reminded him of the one his father had brought from Guadalajara, and he bought that too. Don Fortino installed it next to the lock without anyone asking him to, as an extra touch that the foreman decided to add because he understood, without needing explanations, the kind of history that house held. What hadn't changed was the mesquite tree in the patio. No one touched it. No one spoke of touching it. It was the oldest tree on the property, planted by Grandfather Refugio when the house was still just 4 walls and a dream. And it was still there with its generous shade and its branches twisted by time, perfectly in place. On the morning of the 6th day, when the workers finished clearing the debris and loaded their tools into Don Fortino's truck, Consuelo stepped out onto the porch and stood looking at the new facade of her house for a long moment. Then she went inside, came out with 2 folded bills, and tried to give them to Don Fortino. The foreman looked at the bills, looked at her, looked at Aurelio, who was standing by the mesquite tree with his phone in his hand. "It's already paid for, señora," he said with great respect. "The lawyer has already settled everything." Consuelo looked at him. Then she put the bills in the pocket of her apron. "Then please accept some hibiscus water," she said. "I just made it." Don Fortino accepted the hibiscus water. His workers also took a 20-minute break on the porch, sitting on chairs around a table, a simple wooden table that Aurelio had ordered from Sayula, drinking Consuelo's sweet, red water. And when they left, the dirt street of San Isidro Polvoriento fell silent for the first time in a week. Aurelio and Consuelo sat on the porch. It was still early morning with fresh light, and the house smelled of new paint and recent wood and a kind of beginning that had no precise name, but that they both recognized. "How does it feel?" Aurelio asked. "Different," said Consuelo. She looked at the new roof of the porch, the clean beams, the aligned eaves, no cardboard, no stones, no sag on the right side. Different, but good. They were silent for a moment. "Aurelio," said Consuelo, with that voice she used when she was about to say something she had thought about for a long time before deciding to say it. "I need to talk to you about Rodrigo." "I know what he did, and I know what you did." She was referring to the lawyer, the notarized affidavit, the promised deposit for the baby's surgery. "And I want to tell you what I think." "Tell me." Consuelo clasped her hands on her lap. She looked at the patio, the mesquite tree, the purple bougainvillea that now had a new pot by the fence, also sent by Aurelio, without explanation. "I don't want you to destroy Rodrigo," she said. He didn't answer immediately. "I'm not talking about forgetting what he did," Consuelo continued, measuring each word with the precision of someone who had waited for the right moment to say them. "I'm talking about not going further than you've already gone. You have the notary's document, you have the receipts, you have everything to make your brother's life impossible if you wanted to. And maybe he deserves it." She paused. "But I don't want you to do it." "Why not?" It wasn't a challenging question, it was genuine. "Because his children are not to blame. It's direct, as always. Itzel, Cristobal, the younger ones, and the baby who is coming with the heart problem. They have no fault in what their father did. And if you ruin Rodrigo, you ruin them too. A brief pause. I can't ask you that. Aurelio looked at the mesquite tree. I wasn't going to ruin him, Mom. I was going to make sure he knew that what he did has consequences. He already knows. Consuelo looked him straight in the eye. Did you see his face when he left? He already knows. That's enough. It's enough for you. A long pause, longer than the others. Yes, said Consuelo. For me, it is. Aurelio studied her. He studied that still profile, that firm jaw, those calm hands on her lap. And he understood, not for the first time that week, but with more clarity than before, that his mother was not a woman who forgave out of weakness. She was a woman who forgave by choice, who looked at the whole situation. Rodrigo's children, the sick baby, the years Rodrigo had also sacrificed, even though he had betrayed them later. And she decided with full awareness where to draw the line of justice and where to begin the territory of forgiveness. Not because the damage didn't exist, but because there were things more important than the damage. There's one condition, said Consuelo. What? That he comes to see me once a month, at least, with his children. A pause. I want to know my grandchildren, Aurelio. I've seen them very little, and I want them to know me before there's no more time. Something tightened in Aurelio's chest at that last sentence. Before there's no more time. His mother had said it with the same calm with which she said everything, without drama, like another meteorological fact. But the phrase had a specific weight that Aurelio felt settle in his sternum and stay there. I'll tell Rodrigo, he said. No. Consuelo shook her head gently. I'll tell him. He's my son. I'll talk to him. Aurelio nodded. There was another silence, this one lighter than the previous ones. Outside the fence, a neighbor passed with a shopping bag. She looked inside, saw the renovated facade, and stopped. Oh, how beautiful the house turned out, Consuelo, she shouted from the street. Thank you, Hortensia, Consuelo replied without getting up. It looks just like it used to, like when Don Celestino lived here. Consuelo didn't respond to that, just smiled very briefly toward the patio. Aurelio looked at her. Do you remember when Dad painted the facade yellow? He said. He said it would look pretty, and it turned out the yellow he bought was too loud, and the neighbors teased him for about a month. Consuelo let out a laugh, a real, full laugh, the kind that comes out without permission and fills the space it's in. It was the first time Aurelio had heard her laugh since he arrived, and the sound took him so by surprise that he took a second to react. And then he laughed too. Oh, your father, said Consuelo, her voice still warm from the laughter. He said the yellow would look lighter when it dried, and it never dried lighter. That yellow lasted 10 years, just as loud, and he never admitted it. He told everyone it was colonial yellow. Colonial yellow. Consuelo wiped her eye with the tip of her apron. Oh, that man. They laughed together for another moment, and then silence returned. But it was a different silence than all the others that week. Light, with something inside that resembled rest. Mom, said Aurelio, when the silence had found its form, I want to propose something. Propose. I want you to let me install some things in the house. No major changes. The kitchen needs a new stove. That gas burner has been there for years. A refrigerator, a water heater for the bathroom, basic things. He paused. And I want to hire someone to come 3 times a week. Not a nurse, not an employee, someone to help you with errands, with heavy cleaning, with whatever you don't want to carry alone. Consuelo listened silently. You mean a service girl? She asked. I mean someone to help you. I can manage my house alone. I know, but you don't have to manage alone. No one has to manage everything alone, Mom. Not you, not anyone. Consuelo thought. She looked at the new roof, looked at the new table, looked at her hands, the stove, and the refrigerator. "The water heater, too," she said finally, "because that cold water bathroom has tired me out." "But the girl?" She paused. "Let it not be a girl. Let it be someone older from this town, someone who knows how things are here, who won't come telling me how to make my own tortillas like you do. And not here every day. Twice a week is fine. I have my space. Twice a week, and I'll choose her." "You choose her," Consuelo nodded, with the solemnity of someone who has negotiated a treaty and is satisfied with the terms. "All right," she said. Then she stood up from her chair, went into the kitchen, and returned with 2 cups of coffee. Ground coffee, not chicory. Aurelio had ordered ground coffee from Sayula on the second day, and Consuelo had accepted it without comment. But since then, she prepared it every morning with the ritualistic precision of things that are truly important to someone. She handed a cup to Aurelio, sat down again. They drank the coffee on the porch of the rebuilt house, under the new roof that smelled of fresh wood, with the clean patio and the mesquite tree moving slightly in the morning breeze, and San Isidro Polvoriento making its usual noises outside the fence. Footsteps, distant voices, the motor of a motorcycle, the church bells marking 9 o'clock. It was an ordinary Tuesday in an ordinary town, and at the same time, it was the first day of something that didn't have a name yet, but that they both recognized perfectly. 3 months later, Aurelio Montoya returned to San Isidro Polvoriento for the 5th time since that afternoon when his black Suburban turned the last dirt curve and he saw his mother sewing rags on the porch. The 5th time was different from the previous 4. The previous 4 had been work visits, to supervise the construction, to sign documents with lawyer Cervantes and Sayula, to install the new stove and refrigerator, to interview 3 women from the town with Consuelo, until his mother chose Doña Esperanza, 62 years old, a widow, a neighbor from the street behind, who made tortillas just like Consuelo and who, for that reason, passed the test without question. This 5th time was different because Aurelio wasn't coming to solve anything. He was coming to stay for the weekend. That was all. No agenda, no meetings, no Don Fortino nor lawyer Cervantes, nor anything to sign. The Suburban arrived on a Friday afternoon, with Gerardo at the wheel and no bodyguards. Aurelio had decided to come alone in a practical sense, because San Isidro was San Isidro, and he didn't need escorts in a town where everyone had known him since he was 8 years old. In the back seat, he had a canvas bag with clothes for 2 days, and a box with things he had bought in Guadalajara. A crossword puzzle book that Consuelo always did when she found the newspaper. 2 different types of ground coffee, and a navy blue Oaxacan wool rebozo, which he had seen in a shop in the historic center and bought thinking it would look good on his mother, although he didn't know exactly why he thought so. Consuelo opened the door before he even knocked. She always heard him coming. She had that mother's radar, one that never dulled with years or distance. "You're here," she said. "I'm here," Aurelio replied. The house smelled different, not of construction or fresh paint. Those smells had long since faded. It smelled of something older, calmer, of coffee, of orange blossom, because Consuelo had placed a new potted plant by the living room window, of the wax Doña Esperanza had used to polish the cement floor that very Wednesday, the scent of a lived-in, cared-for home, the scent of a house that breathes. They ate dinner at the new table in the covered patio. Black beans, red rice, stuffed tillies that Consuelo had prepared before he arrived, because she knew they were his favorite since he was a boy, and because it was her way of saying welcome without uttering the word. Gerardo dined with them too, at the same table, because Consuelo didn't understand the idea of anyone eating separately when there was plenty of space. After dinner, Gerardo left for his room at the Sayula boarding house. Aurelio and Consuelo stayed in the patio with their coffee under the San Isidro sky, which at night held more stars than Aurelio remembered, or perhaps simply more than Guadalajara allowed him to see. "Rodrigo visited Tuesday," Consuelo said. "How was he?" "Good. He came with Marlene and their 2 older boys." A pause. The children were very well behaved. Itzel helped me water the plants. I'm glad. The baby is due in 6 weeks. They're going to name him Celestino. She said it with a peculiar stillness, as if the name still took a moment to settle on her tongue. The name of the dead grandfather. The name of the father who fell from scaffolding without insurance when Rodrigo was 14 and Aurelio was 8. Rodrigo asked if I thought it was a good idea. I told him yes. Aurelio said nothing. He looked at the stars. And the surgery? He asked. They have a date. The lawyer spoke with the hospital. Consuelo picked up her cup. Thank you, son. Don't thank me for that. I'm thanking you just the same. Silence. The silence of San Isidro at night, deep and complete, with crickets and a gentle wind, and a dog barking in the distance, but without the constant electrical hum of the city that one only notices when it disappears. Mom? Aurelio said, looking out at the patio. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, even if the answer isn't what I want to hear. Ask. Do you want to come to Guadalajara? I have more than enough space. You could have your own room, your own bathroom, close to everything, better doctors, everything closer. He paused. Do you want to? Consuelo took her time to answer, but when she did, there was no doubt in her voice. No, she said, simple and definitive as always. Why? Because my home is here. My people are here. Your father is here. She gestured with her gaze toward a point in the village, toward the cemetery she had visited every Sunday for the past 34 years. I don't belong in Guadalajara, Aurelio. I belong here, and I will be fine here. Aurelio nodded slowly. Do you promise? Consuelo looked at him with her usual direct, clear gaze. I'll promise if you promise me something. What? That you'll come often? Not just when there's something to fix? Often. Only that. A brief pause. Can you do that? Aurelio thought of his schedule, his projects, his meetings, the trips his company demanded. He thought of the 4 hours of driving between Guadalajara and San Isidro, which with the Suburban took 3.5 and had no traffic at the Sayula toll booth. He thought of the weekends he spent in his penthouse in Colonia Providencia, doing nothing in particular, because the city had nothing to offer that couldn't wait. Can I do that? He said. Consuelo adjusted the new navy blue rebozo over her shoulders. She had opened it when Aurelio took the box out of the canvas bag. She had looked at it for a moment with her hands, and then put it on without a word, which was the highest form of approval Consuelo possessed. Then, we have an agreement. We have an agreement. They drank their coffee in silence. The dusty San Isidro night continued its quiet course outside the gate. The crickets, the wind, the dog in the distance, and the stars above, it all. With that kind, indifferent quality of things that have been in the world far longer than any human story. Aurelio looked at the dark mesquite tree in the center of the patio. He looked at the purple bougainvillea over the new gate. He looked at the patio roof, its clean beams, its aligned tiles, without cardboard or stones, and without the sag on the right side. He thought of everything that had happened in the past 3 months, of Rodrigo and his curt apology, and the baby who would be named Celestino, of Licenciado Cervantes, and the notarized constancy that existed and would continue to exist, even if no one ever used it, which was precisely its function. Of Doña Remedios and the red geraniums on her patio. Of Doña Chabela and the enchiladas she brought when no one else did. Of Don Fortino and the wrought iron knocker he installed without being asked. He thought of the 24-year-old yellowed letter his mother had kept in her blouse pocket the day she gave it to him, and which now, Aurelio knew without asking, she kept somewhere in the house where important things don't get lost. And he thought of his mother, Consuelo Garza de Montoya, who had endured alone for 34 years since her husband fell from scaffolding, who had raised 4 children with her hands and her needle, who had waited for one of them for 22 years, without ever telling him she was waiting, who had forgiven another with a condition so modest it broke the heart just to hear it. I want to meet my grandchildren, and who now sat in her rebuilt patio with a new navy blue rebozo and a cup of coffee, completely in her place, completely at peace, as if it had never been any other way. "What are you thinking about?" Consuelo asked. "About you," Aurelio said. "And what do you think of me?" Aurelio looked at her. He looked at that still, weathered profile, full of years, which was the most familiar profile he had in the world, more so than his own face in the mirror, more than any city or building or contract. "That you are the strongest person I know," he said, "and that it took me too long to tell you so again." Consuelo looked at him for a moment. Then she shifted her gaze to the patio, to the mesquite tree, with the expression of someone receiving something of great value and not knowing exactly how to carry it. "You're back," she said, very softly. "That's what counts." The silence that followed was not awkward, nor heavy, nor full of unspoken things. It was the kind of silence that exists only between people who have said what they needed to say and can now simply be. Outside the gate, on the dirt street of dusty San Isidro, the night was still the same night as always, the same sky with the same stars, the same southern wind that came from the mountains, laden with the scent of dry earth and grass, and something remotely sweet that no one could name, but that everyone who had grown up in that town carried with them forever, somewhere behind their sternum, no matter where life took them. Aurelio Montoya, who had crossed half the country to reach this chair, who had built an empire from scratch, who had learned not to need anything from anyone, sat in the patio of his mother's house until the coffee grew cold and the stars began to move westward and the entire town slept. And he didn't get up until Consuelo yawned discreetly and said it was time. "Go to sleep, Mom. You too." "I'll be right there." Consuelo stood, collected the cups, paused for a moment at the kitchen door, and looked at him. "Aurelio?" "Yes, Mom?" "Thank you for coming back." She didn't say thank you for the house, or for the roof, or for the money, or for the lawyer, or for the navy blue rebozo. She said, "Thank you for coming back," which was the only thing he had ever wanted, and the only thing no check could buy. Aurelio looked at her from his chair, with the star-filled sky above, and the dark mesquite tree in the patio, and the scent of the San Isidro night in the air. "Thank you," he said, "for waiting for me." Consuelo nodded once. She entered the kitchen, the door closing softly behind her. Aurelio remained alone in the patio. He looked at the new roof, the clean beams, the aligned tiles, the wrought iron knocker on the front door that gleamed faintly in the light coming from within. And for the first time in many years, perhaps 22, perhaps more, he felt that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not in Guadalajara, not in the penthouse in Colonia Providencia, not in a boardroom, nor on a construction site, nor in any of the places he had built with such effort to prove he could. Here, in this patio, under this roof, in this house, his mother's house, the house where it all began and where, though it took him too long to understand, he had never stopped belonging. The end.